There are certain sounds you never forget. For me, it was the knock. Not loud, not urgent, just 3 soft taps against the door of an apartment I had chosen because no one knew I lived there. I remember thinking, if I don't move, it might go away. Outside, Seoul was quiet in that unsettling way it only gets after midnight. No traffic, no voices, just the hum of electricity in the walls and the sound of my own breathing, uneven, betraying me. The clock on the microwave blinked 3 a.m. I hadn't slept. I never did anymore. The knock came again, this time closer, as if whoever stood on the other side knew exactly where I was standing, knew I was listening. I took 1 step forward, then stopped, because that was when I heard my name. Not spoken loudly, not called out, whispered. The way it had been whispered once before, months ago, under streetlights near the Cheonggyecheon stream, when he had smiled like we still had time. I swallowed. I told myself this was punishment, or memory, or guilt finally rotting my brain from the inside out. After everything I had lost, my family, my future, my name, I didn't deserve miracles. I reached for the door anyway. My hand hovered over the lock, and for a moment, a terrifying one, I wondered, if I opened it, would I finally get the truth, or would I lose the last illusion keeping me alive? The knock came a 3rd time, gentler now, patient, like whoever stood outside already knew my answer. There are certain silences you learn to respect. At Hanyang University, silence had rules. You lowered your head when you passed people like me. You spoke when spoken to. You didn't ask questions you weren't prepared to forget. That was how doors stayed closed. I noticed Kang Min-jae because he broke that silence. It was a small thing, barely worth remembering at the time. A late winter afternoon. The corridor outside the lecture hall smelled like old books and disinfectant. Everyone bowed when I passed, except him. Min-jae stood near the windows, hands in his coat pockets, eyes unfocused as if he were listening to something only he could hear. When our gazes met, he didn't rush, he didn't apologize, he just looked at me. Later, I would recognize that look, the same one I would see reflected in my bathroom mirror months later at 3 a.m., standing inches from a door I was afraid to open. But then, I only felt irritation. "Do you know who I am?" I asked. He blinked once, slow. Yes. No honorific, no apology. The word landed softly, like a knock that wasn't meant to be heard by anyone else. People around us went still. I waited for him to add more. He didn't. That was when I should have walked away. I knew the cost of attention. I had been raised on it. My father's name had taught me how quickly curiosity turned into consequence. Instead, I asked, "Then why didn't you bow?" Min-jae hesitated. Not long, just enough. "I didn't want to lie," he said. Something about the way he said it unsettled me, like he wasn't talking about respect at all, but about survival. A girl laughed nervously nearby. Someone coughed. The moment broke. I told myself it meant nothing. I told myself I wouldn't think about him again. That night, I stood on the balcony of our house in Songhwa-dong, listening to the city breathe below me. I tried to recall his face and failed. I told myself that was proof he was forgettable. I slept. I dreamed of doors. In the dream, I stood on one side listening to someone on the other whisper my name. I couldn't tell if I wanted to open it or pretend I hadn't heard anything at all. The next morning, I learned his name, and I realized, with a cold certainty I didn't yet understand, that some silences aren't meant to be respected. They're meant to be broken. The snow melted slowly on the streets outside Hanyang University, but inside I felt the chill even when the heating worked perfectly. Min-jae had a way of entering a room that left everyone else blurred. He wasn't loud, wasn't noticeable, yet he drew attention from somewhere I didn't know existed in myself. I passed him in the library that afternoon. His head was buried in a pile of worn textbooks, a pencil tucked behind his ear, and a notebook filled with scribbles I didn't recognize. I thought he would look up, ignore me, pretend we didn't exist to each other. But his gaze met me across the aisle, and for a moment, we didn't speak, didn't move. It was a standoff neither of us knew how to win. I wanted to look away. I wanted to pretend our last conversation, the one about bows and respect, never happened. But I didn't. Something in the set of his shoulders made my throat tight, something I couldn't name. I walked towards him, careful not to step too close, careful not to let my presence seem deliberate. But as always, I failed. "You're everywhere," I said, trying to sound casual, "even when you shouldn't be." Minjae didn't flinch. He didn't apologize. He simply shrugged, and for a second, it felt like a challenge. I hated that feeling. "I could say the same," he replied, softly, almost to himself, but loud enough for me to hear. We lingered there in the quiet of the library. Each glance stacked questions in my mind. Why does he keep appearing? Does he mean to provoke me? Or is this accidental? Did he know I would notice him no matter how subtle he tried to be? I forced myself to open my mouth and say nothing, because speaking seemed dangerous. Every word with him felt like a line I wasn't allowed to cross, a fence I could fall over without realizing it. And yet, the pull was irresistible, magnetic, and entirely my own fault. Then it happened. A loud crash from the next aisle, books scattered, a chair tipped over. Minjae's attention flicked to it, and I almost moved to help, but something stopped me. A quiet voice whispered in my mind, "Do you even know him?" And just like that, the moment broke. We didn't talk, we didn't touch. We only stood there, frozen, aware of each other's presence in ways no one else could understand. That night, I found myself staring at the ceiling of my room, replaying every subtle movement of his, every quiet pause. The hallway lights flickered in my memory, shadows stretching and twisting in ways that felt deliberate, like messages written just for me. And I wondered, not for the first time, what he was hiding and whether I would ever be allowed to see it. I didn't know yet that he was already holding pieces of my past, things I thought only my father and I knew. That night, my thoughts refused sleep. Minjae's image lingered in my mind, the tilt of his head, the way he moved, the way he didn't bow to anyone but still somehow demanded attention. And then my phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number, just one line. "Be careful tonight. Not everyone is who they seem." I stared at it, frozen. The words weren't a warning exactly, they were a promise, and I knew, somewhere deep down, that the danger wasn't from him. It had been following me my whole life. The neon glow of Mapogu's streets reflected in puddles from the day's rain. I wandered without thinking, drawn to a rhythm I didn't understand. Somehow I ended up near the convenience store where Minjae worked. The place was small, cramped, flickering with harsh fluorescent light, and smelled faintly of fried snacks and sanitizer. He was stacking shelves, humming softly under his breath, oblivious to the world around him, or maybe just pretending he was. When he looked up and caught my gaze, the air shifted. I realized again that I didn't want to walk away, but I also didn't know how to stand there without making everything worse. "Why are you here?" he asked quietly, almost like he didn't want anyone else to hear. "I could ask you the same," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. My heart beat faster than I wanted to admit. He smiled faintly, tiredly. "Do you want something?" I shook my head, even though part of me wanted to buy a bottle of water just to linger near him. Instead, we stood there, close enough that the warmth of his presence seeped into me, dangerous and intoxicating. Later, we ended up on a rooftop near the Han River. The city stretched below us, distant and soft, while the cold night air made my skin tingle. We didn't speak for a long time. I tried to memorize every detail, the way his hair caught the moonlight, the curve of his jaw, the faint scar in his wrist, things I shouldn't notice, things I wasn't allowed to feel. "Why do you keep finding me?" I finally asked. He didn't answer first. Instead, he leaned slightly closer, and for a fleeting moment, the world narrowed to only him and me. "I'm careful," he said finally, voice low, "but I notice you too." The words didn't mean what I wanted them to. They didn't reassure. They unsettled me. And yet they tied me to him tighter than anything I had ever known. We walked together to the edge of the roof. My hands were cold, his weren't. I wanted to take his hand, and for a heartbeat I almost did, but I didn't. That would have been a line I couldn't cross, not yet. And I realized then that every moment with him felt like standing on the edge of a precipice. The space between us shrank without warning, his shoulder brushing mine as we paused at the railing. His breath came in a soft cloud mingling with the chill, and I felt the pull like gravity, drawing me nearer. He turned his face toward me, eyes searching in the dim light, and his fingers grazed the back of my hand, light, hesitant, like testing the weight of something fragile. I didn't pull away. Instead, I shifted closer, our arms pressing together now, the heat from his body cutting through the night's bite. My pulse thrummed in my ears, loud against the distant hum of traffic below. He lifted his hand slowly, tracing the line of my jaw with his knuckles, a touch so gentle it bordered on reverence, yet it sent sparks racing across my skin. Our gaze locked, and the tension coiled tighter, unspoken words hanging heavy. Then, as if deciding all at once, he closed the gap, his lips meeting mine in a kiss that started soft, exploratory, his mouth warm and tentative against the cold. I leaned into it, my hand finding his chest, feeling the steady rise and fall beneath his jacket. The kiss deepened gradually, his fingers sliding to the nape of my neck, holding me there with a firmness that betrayed the caution in his words. I parted my lips, tasting the faint salt of the night air on him, our breath sinking in short, irregular bursts. His other hand settled at my waist, thumb brushing the edge of my hip through fabric, pulling me flush against him, without demand, just presence, intimate, insistent. A sudden shout from the street below, footsteps, someone calling Min Jae. He stiffened. I wanted to ask, but my voice caught in my throat. The city below was bright and loud, but up here, we were alone. I didn't know whether the danger was real or if the silence between us had grown dangerous instead, and I didn't know yet whether I wanted to leave or stay, because staying meant crossing lines I had sworn I never would. It was 2:17 a.m. when I found him. The alley near Suwon Station smelled of rain, refuse, and something faintly metallic. I had been following a thread of intuition I didn't truly trust. My phone had no signal, my hands shook, and then I saw him, crouched against the wall, one hand pressed to his side. Blood, bright and sudden, impossible to ignore in the dim light. "Min Jae!" I ran toward him, ignoring the cold that bit at my lungs. He tried to wave me off, but he was too weak. I ripped a clean handkerchief from my pocket and pressed it to the wound. His eyes met mine, full of something I didn't understand. Fear, yes. Relief, maybe, and something else. A question I didn't dare ask. He gripped my wrist briefly, too tight, before letting go. "Don't look," he whispered. I couldn't. I had no choice. My gaze caught the smear of red against pale skin. And then, in a blur of instinct, I wrapped the handkerchief around his injury as best I could, trying not to think about the consequences if someone, my father, anyone, saw me like this. He exhaled sharply. "You shouldn't be here." "I couldn't leave you," I said, though I wondered if those words sounded foolish even to me. I felt my heartbeat echoing in my ears. This wasn't just about helping someone. This was about how close he allowed me to be, and how dangerously I wanted to stay there. He flinched when I brushed a strand of hair from his face, a reaction so small it nearly broke me. I realized then that I was already in too deep, that some lines had been crossed, quietly, long before this moment. Kneeling beside him, my body pressed close to shield him from the alley's chill, I felt the tremor in his frame seep into mine. His hand, still weak, rested on my arm, fingers curling slightly into the fabric of my sleeve as if anchoring himself to me. The air between us thickened, charged with the raw edge of vulnerability, his breath ragged against my neck. I adjusted the makeshift bandage, my palm lingering on his abdomen longer than necessary, tracing the warmth of his skin beneath the bloodied cloth. He didn't pull away. Instead, his gaze held mine, dark and intense, pulling me deeper into the unspoken pull that had shadowed us for so long. My free hand rose to his shoulder, squeezing gently, then sliding up to cup the side of his neck, thumb brushing the pulse point there, quick, alive, matching the frantic rhythm in my chest. He leaned into the touch, his forehead dropping to rest against my collarbone for a moment, the weight of him both heavy and intimate. I shifted closer, our thighs pressing together on the damp ground, my knee nudging between his legs without intent, yet the contact sent a jolt through me. His fingers tightened on my arm, sliding down to my wrist, holding me there as if afraid I'd vanish into the night. The desire hung silent, electric, his lips parting as if to speak, but instead he tilted his head, nuzzling faintly against my jaw, the scrape of stubble rough and real. I turned my face toward him, our noses brushing, breaths mingling in the narrow space. No words, just the slow drag of his hand up my arm, exploring the line of my bicep, while mine threaded into his hair, tugging lightly to hold him steady, to keep this fragile closeness from shattering. Time blurred in the alley's shadows, our bodies aligned in quiet urgency, every point of contact a silent confession of need, restrained by the wound between us, by the world waiting to intrude. The alley grew colder. The faint hum of the city reminded us that life continued elsewhere, indifferent to us. He tried to stand, and I half supported him, aware of how fragile he seemed and how much of myself I was giving away just to hold him upright. "I don't know who's after me," he admitted, voice trembling, "but you shouldn't know either." I felt my chest tighten, not just because of the fear, but because I realized I had already chosen him, no matter the danger, no matter the consequences. And just as I thought I understood, he leaned slightly closer, enough that I could smell the faint scent of rain and something else, something private, something mine. Then he pushed me away gently. "Go, please, before it's too late." I hesitated. The decision weighed on me. Step back or step forward? And at that moment, I knew. Some doors, once opened, could never be closed again. The city slept, but I didn't. I walked alone along the Qianqian stream, the faint water trickling like a secret no one else could hear. The night felt heavier than usual, shadows stretching across the pavement, and I knew he was out there somewhere I had no right to follow but couldn't resist. I found him on a bench, head bent, hands buried in his coat pockets. The streetlights reflected in his hair, catching on something I wasn't ready to name. He didn't notice me at first, and I almost turned back, but the pull in my chest wouldn't allow it. I sat beside him, careful not to touch, careful not to breathe too loudly. For a long time, we didn't speak. The silence wasn't empty. It was layered with unspoken truths, questions I couldn't ask, and confessions I wasn't brave enough to make. "You shouldn't be here," he said finally, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I know," I replied, "but I am." He exhaled slowly, like the sound carried weight beyond just the words. "Some things aren't safe. You don't want to be tangled in this." "I already am," I admitted, though my throat tightened. The words were dangerous. They were confession and curse all at once. We stayed like that until the moon dipped behind clouds. My hand hovered over the bench as if I wanted to reach for his, but fear kept me frozen. He glanced at me, a flicker of something, trust, warning, desire, crossing his expression before it vanished again. The callback, the line from months ago, "Don't ever leave without saying goodbye," resurfaced in my mind. I wanted to speak it, but the words felt too heavy. He leaned closer. The warmth of his presence grazed my arm, and I could feel the subtle rise and fall of his breath. My chest ached, not from cold, but from the distance between us, the tension that neither of us could fully resolve. Then, unexpectedly, he spoke, almost too softly to hear. "If you leave, say goodbye, or stay and face it." The words struck me harder than any blow. I realized he was giving me a choice, one I couldn't ignore. I had already chosen, though I didn't yet understand the cost. Before I could respond, a shadow flickered across the bridge. Footsteps echoed in the distance, too precise, too deliberate. Minjae's gaze sharpened. He didn't move, but I knew he noticed. The tension escalated like a drumbeat I couldn't escape. I wanted to ask who it was, but my voice caught in my throat. I realized then that the danger wasn't just outside us, it had seeped into our very proximity. We left the bench in silence. The stream reflected the city lights, fractured like the truth we both carried but refused to speak aloud. Every glance between us was loaded, every step careful, every breath measured. The air grew thicker as we moved away from the bench, the stream's murmur fading behind us like a reluctant witness. Min-jae's strides were measured, purposeful, his coat brushing against my side with each step. Not quite accidental, but close enough to send a shiver racing up my spine. I matched his pace, my heart pounding in rhythm with the distant footsteps that seemed to echo our own, always just out of sight. We turned onto a narrower path where the city lights dimmed, casting elongated shadows that danced like unspoken promises. His hand swung loosely at his side, knuckles grazing mine once, twice, before pulling back as if burned. The contact was fleeting, electric, leaving my skin tingling in its wake. I didn't pull away. Instead, I let my fingers curl slightly, inviting the possibility without demanding it. "Keep close," he murmured, his voice threading through the night like smoke. It wasn't a command, but the undercurrent of urgency made my pulse quicken. I nodded, stepping nearer until the heat from his body seeped through the fabric of my jacket, warming the chill that had settled in my bones. Our arms brushed now, a steady rhythm that spoke of reliance, of something fragile building between the cracks of caution. The footsteps grew louder, a staccato warning that pulled his attention forward. He scanned the darkness ahead, his profile sharp under the faint glow of a distant lamp. I watched him, the way his jaw tightened, the subtle flex of his shoulders beneath the coat. There was a raw intensity to him in that moment, a guarded strength that drew me in deeper, making the space between us feel both vast and suffocatingly small. We paused at the edge of a small footbridge arching over the stream, the water below swirling in lazy eddies. Min-jae leaned against the railing, his eyes fixed on the opposite bank where the shadows seemed to cluster unnaturally. The confession from earlier hung between us, heavier now in the confined space of the bridge. I wanted to bridge the gap further, to let my palm slide over his, to feel the calluses and warmth that hinted at a life lived on edges. But the footsteps, closer, deliberate, held me back, turning desire into a taut wire stretched to breaking. He shifted then, his body angling toward mine, shielding me from the unseen eyes across the water. The movement brought his chest nearer, the rise and fall syncing with my own in a way that felt intimate, conspiratorial. His gaze finally met mine, dark and searching, holding layers of warning and want. For a heartbeat, his free hand lifted, hovering near my waist, as if debating whether to pull me closer or push me away. "You chose this," he whispered, his voice roughened by the tension coiling in him. The words weren't accusation, they were acknowledgement, laced with a heat that made my core tighten. I leaned in fractionally, my shoulder pressing against his, the contact sending a slow burn through me. No more words passed, but the silence thrummed with possibility. The brush of fabric, the shared warmth, the electric pull that promised more if the night allowed it. The shadow on the bank moved, a silhouette detaching from the gloom, and Min-jae's hand finally settled at the small of my back, light, protective, but enough to make my skin flush. We moved again, slipping into the deeper shadows of the path, his touch guiding me forward. The danger pressed in, but so did the unspoken bond, weaving tension into every step, every graze of skin on skin. As we wove through the quieter alleys branching off the stream, the city's hum dulled to a distant pulse. His fingers lingered at my back longer than necessary, tracing a subtle path upward before dropping away. Each withdrawal felt like a loss, each accidental brush a spark reigniting the ache. I glanced at him, catching the way his lips parted slightly, as if holding back words, or perhaps a breath he wanted to share. We stopped at last beneath a canopy of overhanging trees, the leaves rustling like conspirators. The footsteps had faded, but the threat lingered in the air, sharpening the moment. Min-jae turned to face me fully, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that stole the breath from my lungs. His hand rose again, this time cupping the side of my neck, thumb brushing the edge of my jaw in a feather-light stroke that sent warmth pooling low in my belly. "Tell me to stop," he said, voice barely above a murmur, his touch steady despite the storm in his gaze. But I didn't.
Instead, I tilted my head into his palm, the subtle pressure of his fingers igniting a slow, building fire. The world narrowed to that point of contact, the roughness of his skin against mine, the shared heat, the unspoken invitation hanging between us like the mist rising from the stream. In that suspended instant, with danger circling just beyond the trees, the choice felt clearer than ever. Stay and let the tension unravel into something deeper. The night held its breath, waiting for what came next. I didn't sleep that night. My apartment in Songhua-dong felt suffocating, walls pressing in, shadows gathering in corners. I replayed every detail from the previous evening, the flicker of light in his eyes, the weight of his gaze, the faint tremor in his hands. I lied to myself, as I often did. I told myself I was careful. I told myself I didn't care as much as I clearly did. And yet the truth gnawed at me. I was already entwined in his life, in ways I couldn't disentangle without pain. The next day, I approached him carefully on campus. He was by the fountain, his posture rigid, hands clasped in front of him as if bracing for impact. I wanted to run to him, to tell him that last night hadn't scared me, that I wanted to stay, that I didn't care about consequences. Instead, I said nothing. I watched from across the square, letting him notice me, or not. His eyes met mine for a fraction of a second, and I saw something I hadn't expected. Relief. Or was it warning? "I've been careful," he said, finally, approaching me. "But people notice things, eventually." "Notice what?" I asked, but he only shook his head. His secrecy frustrated me, yet drew me in more tightly. Every lie he told me, every omission, only deepened the pull I felt. I couldn't trust him fully. I couldn't trust myself, and the mix of both was intoxicating. Later, in a quiet alley behind campus, he finally spoke of things he shouldn't. Not fully, but in fragments. Shadows of a past life, mentions of people who weren't supposed to exist anymore, whispers of danger that had followed him across cities. I realized then that every moment I spent with him was a gamble. Every step I took toward him could unravel everything. My family, my reputation, my life. And yet, I couldn't step back. We walked in silence after that, the city's noise fading behind us. I thought about the handkerchief, the rooftop, the stream, and the faint line of warning he had whispered. Some things aren't safe. A shadow moved suddenly from behind a dumpster. Min-jae stiffened. I wanted to act, to protect him, but he gestured for me to stay back. A pair of men in dark coats passed by, oblivious, or pretending to be.
I realized in that moment that danger had always been near, always, and that my choices mattered in ways I had never anticipated. I couldn't find him. Hours passed, and the streets of Seoul felt suddenly alien, threatening. Every alley, every cafe, every rooftop I remembered felt empty, like a stage after the actors had left. The world seemed to whisper in his absence. I questioned everything. Why had I allowed myself to care? Why did his absence feel like a wound I couldn't see? And most pressing, what secret had he carried that made him vanish so suddenly? I retraced our steps. The stream, the convenience store, the alley behind the university. Every place held memory and danger intertwined. And everywhere, the lingering echo of his warning. Don't trust everyone. Not even me. When I finally spotted him, he was crouched by a wall near the Han River, distant and still, hands pressed over something hidden in his coat. His gaze flicked to me briefly, and then away. I wanted to call out. I wanted to run to him, but something in his posture warned me he didn't want to be followed. I froze, torn. To move forward could expose him or myself. To step back felt like abandoning him, and I realized I was already too late. He looked smaller somehow, fragile against the vastness of the city, and yet his presence still commanded me, still held me. I wanted to scream his name, but my voice refused to obey. A sudden shout echoed from the bridge above. Min-jae flinched, eyes darting toward the sound. I wanted to ask him what it meant, but the words caught in my throat. The threat, or perhaps a reminder of it, was closer than I wanted to admit. He spoke finally, almost too softly. "You're getting too close, too involved. It's dangerous." I swallowed. He wasn't warning me. He was telling me to stop, but I couldn't. My desire to protect him, to understand him, had already overcome reason. We stayed like that, breathing in sync, hearts hammering in unison, until the distant sound of sirens forced him to vanish into the night. I watched him go, helpless, knowing I couldn't follow, yet unable to leave the spot he had occupied. I didn't go looking for the past. That's the lie I told myself later when everything had already collapsed. The truth is, I was restless. Min Jae's disappearance left a hollow space in my days, a quiet ache that followed me everywhere. Lecture halls, corridors, my own bedroom. I replayed our last moments over and over, searching for something I'd missed. A word, a look, a warning disguised as indifference. Sleep abandoned me completely. At 1:42 a.m., I sat on my bed with my laptop open, scrolling aimlessly through archived university forums, old local news mirrors, forgotten corners of the internet that still remembered what powerful people wanted erased. I wasn't searching for anything specific. That made it worse. The article appeared between two broken links. The headline was deliberately dull. Warehouse fire claims 2 lives, 1 missing. No sensationalism, no outrage, just facts stripped down to their barest bones. The date stopped me cold. 2009. My fingers hovered above the trackpad. That year had weight in my family. It was the year my father stopped answering certain questions. The year our home security tripled. The year my mother began taking long, silent walks at night, returning with eyes too tired for someone still smiling in public. I clicked. The page loaded slowly, as if resisting. 2 workers dead. Cause: electrical failure. Investigation closed within weeks. Then one line buried near the end. A teenage male, approximately 17 years old, remains unaccounted for. No name, no photo, no follow-up. My heart began to race, instinct screaming that this wasn't coincidence. I scrolled down, scanning metadata, timestamps, anything left behind by carelessness or arrogance. That's when I saw it. A corrupted attachment, an image file that hadn't been fully scrubbed. I hesitated. Opening it felt like crossing a threshold, like stepping through a door I would never be able to close again. I clicked. The photo loaded in fragments. Firelight, smoke, a blurred figure half turned toward the camera. Someone young, someone terrified. Then my breath caught painfully in my throat. The scar near the eyebrow, the shape of the eyes. Min Jae. I slammed the laptop shut, heart pounding violently, as if that could undo what I'd seen. I opened it again, immediately, desperate and shaking, hoping I'd imagined it. I hadn't. Below the image was a single line of data. Date of birth. It matched his, exactly. Everything rearranged itself in my mind with sickening clarity. The injuries he wouldn't explain, the way he avoided police, the way he listened for footsteps even when nothing was there, the fear he tried so hard to bury under indifference. He hadn't been running from nothing. He'd been running from someone. And suddenly, the most terrifying possibility surfaced. What if he wasn't hiding from me? What if he was hiding because of me? My phone vibrated violently in my hand. Unknown number. You shouldn't be reading that. Cold crept into my chest. Another message followed immediately. Stop digging. If you keep going, you won't be the only one who pays. I stood, heart hammering, scanning my apartment. The door, the hallway camera, the windows, nothing. But I knew with chilling certainty that I was no longer alone in this story. The envelope arrived 2 days later. It lay on my apartment floor like an accusation, pristine and unmarked, slipped beneath a door that was supposed to protect me. My name was written neatly on the front, the handwriting careful, almost respectful. I didn't recognize it. That terrified me more than if I had. I locked the door, checked it twice, then sat on the floor with my back against the wall, staring at the envelope for a full minute before opening it. Inside was a photograph. It stole the air from my lungs. Flames consumed the background, wild, uncontrollable, lighting the night sky with violence. Two figures stood in front of the burning structure. One of them was unmistakable. My father. Calm, composed, untouched by the chaos behind him. The other was younger, blood streaked across his face, eyes wide with fear. Min-jae. The room tilted. I pressed my palm to my mouth, swallowing back nausea. The image wasn't staged, it wasn't propaganda. It was too raw, too real, caught in a moment that hadn't been meant to survive. On the back of the photo, written in black ink, were 3 words. You were never the target. Understanding hit me in waves. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't coincidence. Min-jae hadn't been watching me. He'd been watching my father, and I had just happened to be the most dangerous collateral damage. My phone rang. I answered without thinking. You should stop, Min-jae said. His voice sounded distant, strained, like he was speaking from somewhere unsafe. Where are you? I demanded. I can't tell you. Did you know? I asked, my voice breaking despite my effort to steady it. Did you know who my father was? Silence stretched painfully. Then, yes. The word landed like a gunshot. I laughed weakly. So what was I? A strategy? Insurance? No, he said immediately, too quickly. You weren't part of the plan. Then what was I? Another pause, longer this time. You were the risk, he said softly. Something inside me fractured. I finally understood why he kept pulling away, why he warned me, why he disappeared when things felt too close. Loving me didn't protect him. It exposed him. It didn't mean for it to happen like this. I didn't expect you to care, I finished bitterly. The line went dead. I stared at my phone, numb. The power had shifted completely. I wasn't the one choosing anymore. I was the one who could get him killed just by existing. And somewhere between betrayal, guilt, and something painfully close to relief, I admitted the truth I had avoided for too long. I loved him, and that love had just become the most dangerous thing in both our lives. After that call, I stopped pretending I could go back. I skipped lectures, ignored my phone, avoided my father's gaze at dinner. I moved through my days like a ghost, driven by a single obsessive need to understand what I had walked into too late. I went everywhere Min-jae had ever existed. The rooftop, the convenience store, the bench by Cheonggyecheon. Empty. Finally, I found his studio in Mapo-gu. The door wasn't locked. The room was stripped bare, like someone had erased themselves in a hurry. No photos, no personal belongings, just dust, the faint smell of detergent, and the echo of a life abruptly abandoned. I sat on the floor and stayed there until dawn. I wasn't chasing Min-jae anymore. I was chasing my own innocence. That night, I broke into my father's private office. Files, documents, encrypted folders. The truth was worse than I imagined. Payments labeled as consulting, orders signed with clean handwriting, investigations closed with chilling efficiency. My father hadn't lit the fire. He'd simply decided who deserved protection afterward. I vomited in the sink. When I turned, Min-jae stood behind me on the balcony. I didn't hear him arrive. I thought you were gone, I whispered. I was, he replied. We stood close, the city sprawling beneath us. The silence between us was thick with everything we couldn't undo. I can expose him. I can end this. He looked at me sadly. If you do, you lose everything. I already have, I said. For a fragile moment, it felt like forgiveness. Then he stepped back. This was a goodbye, he said quietly. I didn't understand until he left. Without saying it, understood. I studied his face, the calm eyes, the practiced concern. I wondered how many lives had ended behind that expression. I know about the fire, I said. The silence that followed was not shock. It was disappointment. So, he sighed, leaning back, you found it. You destroyed him, I said. You destroyed Min-jae's life. He tilted his head. He survived. Barely. He should have been grateful. The words hollowed me out. You don't understand, my father continued. That boy was never meant to live past that night. Someone intervened, someone careless. I simply ensured the consequences were controlled. I erased him, I whispered. No, he corrected, I spared him. I stood up so abruptly my chair scraped the floor. I loved him. That finally got his attention. The study felt colder. I warned you, my father said quietly. Some relationships are liabilities. Then consider me one, I replied. For a moment I thought he might strike me. Instead, he smiled sadly. You think this ends with truth. It doesn't. It ends with sacrifice. The only question is, whose? That night I sent the files to an encrypted journalist account. Then I waited. The article dropped at exactly 6 a.m. No names, no accusations, just evidence. The headlines spread like wildfire across Seoul before most people woke up. Corruption, suppressed investigations, a fire that was never an accident. My phone exploded with messages, classmates, professors, numbers I didn't recognize. My father didn't call. That was worse. By noon, security surrounded our house. By evening, the silence became unbearable. I found Min-jae's name nowhere in the article. Relief hit first, then fear, because omission was protection, and protection always came at a cost. I finally found him in Incheon, in a crumbling apartment overlooking the docks. He looked thinner, harder, like someone who had already accepted the ending. You did it, he said quietly when I entered. I had to. You shouldn't have. I chose us, I insisted. There is no us anymore, he said. Not after this. The news played in the background, analysts debating consequences like this was theory instead of blood. They won't imprison him. Men like your father don't fall. They pivot. Then we run, I said, together. He shook his head. I'm tired of running. For the first time I saw it, the exhaustion that went deeper than fear, a man who had survived too long. If I disappear now, the story stays clean. If I stay with you, I become leverage. You think I care? I whispered. I think you should, he replied gently. The weight of his words hung in the dim light of the apartment, the distant hum of ships docking outside, like a mechanical heartbeat underscoring the finality. I couldn't let him slip away again, not like this. My hand caught his wrist as he turned towards the door, fingers wrapping firm around the bone, pulling him back. His eyes met mine, surprise flickering before it softened into something raw, unguarded. Don't, I said, voice crapping on the edge of desperation. Not yet. He didn't pull free. Instead, he stepped closer, his free hand rising to cut my jaw, thumb tracing the line of my cheekbone with a gentleness that belied the hardness in his frame. The air between us thickened, charged with months of stolen glances and unspoken wants. His breath ghosted over my lips, warm and uneven, and I leaned in, closing the scant distance until our mouths met, slow at first, a tentative press that deepened as hunger overtook restraint. His lips parted under mine, tongue sliding in to tangle with my own, tasting of salt and the faint bitterness of coffee from earlier. I groaned into the kiss, my grip on his wrist tightening as I backed him towards the worn couch against the wall. Our bodies lined, chests pressing together, the heat of him seeping through our shirts. Min-jae's hands roamed, one threading into my hair to angle my head, the other sliding down my back to fist the fabric at my waist, pulling me flush against him. I broke the kiss to trail my mouth along his jaw, nibbing at the stubble there, feeling the pulse jump in his throat as I sucked lightly on the skin.
His response was a low rumble in his chest, hands dropping to my hips to yank my shirt free from my pants, fingers dipping beneath to stroke the bare skin of my lower back. We stumbled onto the couch, him pulling me down on top, our legs tangling as I straddled his lap. His erection strained against his jeans, pressing up into me, and I rocked forward instinctively, grinding down to feel the hard length rub against my own growing ache. "Fuck," he whispered, eyes dark and heavy-lidded as he watched me. I captured his mouth again, kissing him harder, tongues thrusting in a rhythm that mirrored the buck of my hips. My hands shoved under his shirt, palms sliding over the lean muscles of his abdomen, tracing the ridges before pushing the fabric up and off. His skin was warm, marked faintly by old scars that I explored with fingertips, then lips, bending to lick a path across his collarbone.
He arched into the touch, one hand palming my ass through my pants, squeezing as he urged me closer. The other fumbled with my belt, unbuckling it with urgent tugs until he could pop the button and drag the zipper down. Cool air hit my skin as he shoved my jeans open, hand slipping inside to wrap around my cock through my boxers, stroking firmly, thumb circling the head where pre-cum had already beaded. I gasped, thrusting into his fist, the sensation shooting sparks up my spine. "Minjay." His name was a plea, and he answered by yanking my pants lower, freeing my dick to the air. He pumped me steadily, grip slick and tight, while I worked his jeans open in return, shoving them down his thighs along with his underwear. His cock sprang free, thick and flushed, curving up toward his stomach. I wrapped my hand around it, stroking from base to tip, feeling it twitch in my hold as he groaned low. Our strokes synced, mutual and frantic, breaths mingling as we kissed messily, teeth clashing. But it wasn't enough. The need clawed deeper, demanding more. I pulled back, slicking my palm with spit before reaching between us, fingers teasing his entrance while I jerked him off. He tensed, then relaxed with a shudder, hips lifting to give me access. I pressed one finger in, slow and careful, feeling the tight heat clench around me. "Yes," he breathed, head tipping back as I crooked my finger, searching for that spot. When I found it, he bucked, a curse spilling from his lips. I added a second finger, scissoring gently, stretching him while my other hand kept up the rhythm on his cock. His own hand mirrored mine, fingering me open with practiced ease, his touch sure despite the tremor in his arms, prostate grazing, sending jolts of pleasure through me. Sweat beaded on his skin, the room filling with the sounds of slick slides and ragged moans. I withdrew my fingers, slicking my cock with more spit before positioning myself, the head nudging against his hole. He nodded, eyes locked on mine, and I pushed in, slow, inch by inch, the burn of entry giving way to overwhelming tightness. He was hot inside, walls gripping me like a vice as I bottomed out, balls pressed to his ass. We stilled, breathing hard, foreheads touching again as the intimacy sank in. This was us, bare and real amid the chaos. Then he rolled his hips, urging me to move, and I did, pulling back to thrust in deep. The pace built, steady snaps of my hips driving into him, his legs wrapping around my waist to pull me closer. His cock trapped between us, sliding against my stomach with each plunge, leaking steadily. Minjay met every thrust, arching up, nails digging into my shoulders as he chased the edge. I angled to hit that spot inside him repeatedly, drawing out gasps and whimpers that fueled my own climb. "Come for me," I urged, voice rough, hand dropping to stroke him fast and tight. He shattered first, cock pulsing in my grip, ropes of cum spilling hot across his chest and mine as his body clenched around me, milking my release. I followed seconds later, burying deep as I came, flooding him with heat while waves of pleasure ripped through me. We clung together, trembling, the aftershocks fading into heavy breaths and lingering touches, fingers tracing lazy patterns on sweat-damp skin. He pressed his forehead against mine. It felt like he was mourning. "When this finishes, you'll still have a future. And you? I was never meant to." He left before dawn.
Again. 3 weeks passed. My father resigned. Publicly. Privately, the pressure intensified. I received threats disguised as advice, invitations framed as warnings, doors closed silently. And then, one night, the rain came down so hard it blurred the city. There was a knock at my door. I didn't expect him. Min-jae stood there, soaked, eyes burning with something dangerous. "They're not done," he said. My stomach dropped. "Who?" "Your father, his allies. They're cleaning up." "By silencing witnesses?" "By removing mistakes." He stepped inside. "They're coming for me," he continued, "and they think you're the leash." Fear clawed up my spine. "What do we do?" He looked at me the way people do when they already know the answer. "We make sure there's nothing left to clean." The implication was terrifying, illegal, final. "I won't let you become what he made you," I said. He cupped my face. "I already am." Outside, sirens wailed somewhere distant. The rain intensified. There are moments when choice disappears. Not because you refuse to choose, but because the world removes every safe option and leaves you with truth or blood. Min-jae's plan was simple. That terrified me. No leaks, no journalists, no public spectacle. Just one meeting. A private dinner my father had scheduled under a false name in a quiet restaurant near Bukchon Hunnock Village. Old money preferred old places, walls that had listened to secrets longer than people lived. He expected obedience or fear. "And after?" I asked. Min-jae didn't answer. That should have stopped me. Instead, I followed him. The restaurant was nearly empty. Soft lighting, polite silence, the kind of place where waiters didn't hear confessions even when they were shouted. My father looked up when we approached. For a split second, something flickered across his face. Not surprise, calculation. "You brought him," he said to me. "You asked for leverage. Here it is." Min-jae sat without permission.
The air tightened. "You survived," my father said, studying him. "I underestimated you." "You underestimated consequences," Min-jae replied. I watched two men who had never feared each other finally share the same space. "This ends tonight," my father said calmly, "one way or another." "Yes," Min-jae agreed, "it does." That was when the waiter froze. That was when the doors locked. I realized too late that Min-jae had already crossed his point of no return long before I had. "You always said silence keeps the world clean," Min-jae continued. "I disagree." He slid a phone across the table. Live feed, recordings, audio, faces. Not just corruption, confessions. My father's composure cracked. "You think this will save you," he snapped. "No," Min-jae said softly. "I think it will end you." Security burst in. Everything exploded into motion. Shouting, glass shattering, someone screaming my name. I don't remember who moved first. I only remember grabbing Min-jae's wrist as chaos swallowed the room. "Run!" I shouted. He looked at me, not afraid. Resolved. "You promised," I whispered. "Don't leave without saying goodbye." For the first time, he smiled. And then he pushed me away. Chapter 15. The Boy Who Finally Bowed. There's certain silences you learn to fear. At 3 a.m., the city outside my apartment was holding its breath. The rain had stopped, but everything still felt soaked, like the world was waiting to see what would surface. I stood inches from my door, listening, just like in the dream. The news had been playing on loop for hours. Anonymous data release, a sealed indictment, a powerful man hospitalized after an incident. No mention of Min-jae, not as a suspect, not as a victim, nothing at all. That absence was louder than any headline. My phone buzzed once, a message from an unknown number. "Did you open the door?" My hands shook.
Another message appeared. Some silences aren't meant to be respected. A knock sounded. Soft. Deliberate. The same way his voice had said my name the first time. I didn't move. I remembered the boy in the corridor at Hanyang University, the one who didn't bow, the one who looked at me like I was human before I knew how to be one. I remembered every door I had been afraid to open. The lock clicked. Min Jae stood there, alive, bruised, exhausted, breathing. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, slowly, he bowed. Not deeply, not formally, just enough. "I didn't want to lie anymore," he said. My vision blurred. "What happens now?" I asked. Outside, sirens wailed. Somewhere else, someone else. He stepped past me, into the apartment, into the quiet. Now we live with what we chose. The door closed behind him, and for the first time, I didn't listen to the silence.